And you think it's a significant amount of money in terms of the overall government spend?
But I think every penny that you take from the public should be wisely spent.
That wasn't what you said. You said an awful lot of money being spent on
Well, it's
Irish
in
language
relative
teaching.
terms, but there's a lot of energy and time wasted in this. And it summed up the nonsense that we're having around the Irish language. I just don't think that public funds should be prioritised in science for Irish language.
This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 188 for the 23rd of July, 2026. In a moment, we'll have an extended interview with Jon Burrows, the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party. But first, I just want to say thanks to all of our patrons on Patreon. I really appreciate everyone who donates. We're not a huge podcast, but those donations pay for things like web hosting and phone bills, and Kevin and myself basically donate our time for free. It's also a big morale booster when we get a new patron. It lets us know that there are people out there who listen and who appreciate the podcast. We make a big effort to cover things that are undercovered in Irish media. You're more than welcome to listen for free, but if you think that you could do the same as those other donors and throw in the price of a cup of coffee or even of a pint once or twice a month, there's details how to do that on the website and at the end of the show. Unlike in the Dáil or the Westminster Parliament, there are no by-elections in the Northern Ireland Assembly. So if a member resigns, their party nominates a replacement MLA. So when Rob Swan, the MLA for North Antrim, resigned in 2024, his seat was taken by Colin Crawford. And when Colin Crawford resigned a year later, his seat was taken by Jon Burrows, a former PSNI officer. Then, when Mike Nesbitt resigned as leader of the Ulster Unionist Party in January, there was only one candidate to take over from him, Jon Burrows. And Jon joins me on the line now. Jon, I think many of the listeners, especially south of the border, might not know so much about you. What are you in politics to achieve?
Well, thanks, William, for having me on. Look, I'm in to make a difference in Northern Ireland. I suppose that's why I joined the police. To make a positive difference to society. I think there's so much to be done in Northern Ireland. We've got, of course, a fixation on the Union versus United Ireland, but in so many other ways, there's so much to be done. We have a wonderful country. We are so good at so many things. We've got relative peace now, thanks to the Belfast Agreement and all of those progress. We've got good levels of employment, but we really need to kick on and really create real prosperity for the people of Northern Ireland, like you have down south. We need to have first-class public services. We need to grow our private economy. We need to deal with economic inactivity. And we need to continue the job of building real reconciliation across our communities. So I suppose that's what brought me into politics, and the difference I want to bring is to try and make things better when I leave than whenever I come in.
Okay. And what attracted you specifically to the UUP?
Look, I've always been a supporter. First of all, I'm a unionist. I mean, I believe the best future for Northern Ireland is within the United Kingdom, but having very good relationships with the Irish Republic and having fairness and equality here in Northern Ireland between all communities. The UUP for me is a party that has always been pro law and order. And you can't take that for granted in Northern Ireland. You know, different parties have at times been, I suppose, have either vitriolically attacked the police or violently attacked the police and the security forces. But the Ulster Unionist Party always stayed in the
a lot of nationalists would say that law and order was not synonymous with the police, particularly going back to the 70s and 80s.
Well, they could do, but I suppose my point is if you're a unionist, and look, there's a contested view of history, but if you're a unionist, I believe that the Ulster Unionist Party has been a party that has stood by law and order. It's non-sectarian. That's very important to me because I genuinely believe that all people are created equal, and I want to make Northern Ireland work for everybody. My grandfather, by the way, taught me at a very young age that when he sailed over to Normandy and landed on Sword Beach, He did so with his best friend, Hugh Crangles from West Belfast, a Catholic. And Hugh Crangles died in Normandy. And he taught me that Catholic from West Belfast died for my freedom and never to be sectarian. So the fact the Ulster Unionist Party was always the moderate Unionist Party, pro-law and order, non-sectarian, but proudly Unionist attracted me. And I felt that Northern Ireland hasn't really been well served in the last 20 years by the duopoly, if you like, of Sinn Féin, the DUP, and that we need something different. And I want to see the Ulster Unionist Party grow again and make Northern Ireland work.
I won't get into it, but I think a lot of people will contest what you said about the UUP being non-sectarian. But to go back a little bit in history, the Ulster Unionist Party came out of the Irish Loyal and Patriotic Union, which was essentially the Conservative Party, which is why I think your party is still called officially the Unionist and Conservative Party, or perhaps the Conservative Party is called the Conservative and Unionist Party in Britain.
Yeah, that's correct. The Conservative Party is called the Conservative Unionist Party, yeah.
Okay, so there was a firm link there. And 120 years ago, your party was easily the second biggest party in Ireland. It is now struggling to remain to be the second biggest Unionist party in Northern Ireland, which is a hell of a come down. And even in your own case in North Antrim, which certainly is a stronghold for unionism, there was precious little competition for that Ulster Unionist Party seat, in that your predecessor was only in the job and wasn't elected to it for a year when he resigned and you took over. There was no competition for taking over the leadership of the Ulster Unionist Party. In fact, I think you must have set some sort of record. Am I right in thinking you're the only party leader in the country that hasn't fought a single election in your life?
Well, look, this time last year, I wasn't in politics. Now I'm the leader of the oldest party in Ireland. So that is a dramatic change.
It sure is. But does that not indicate maybe that the Ulster Unionist Party isn't as relevant as it might be? This is the party of Carson, of Craig, of Terence O'Neill, the party that ran Northern Ireland uninterrupted for 50 years from the point of partition up until direct rule in the 1970s. To call Northern Ireland a one-party state even understates the case. Where are you going these days?
Well, look, there's been a lot of change in Northern Ireland, much of it for the better. We're now at peace. The Ulster Unionist Party played a foundational role in the formation of Northern Ireland. It played a pivotal role in the Belfast Agreement. It was the Ulster Unionist Party and the SDLP that brought us the peace deal.
With Trimble.
Now, we have taken a terrible electoral damage as a result.
Would it be smart ass of me to ask which is in worse shape, the Union or the Unionist Party?
Well, I think, first of all, the Union is in better shape than people think. I think we've been written off for a very long time. Look, we're always told that United Ireland is just around the corner. It's over the next hill. It's coming. It's inevitable. But nearly 30 years after the Belfast Agreement, the dial hasn't shifted in terms of those who support a border poll. Nationalist parties get 40% of the vote at any given election. So actually the momentum towards United Ireland hasn't happened. And what I believe is that Northern Ireland's at record levels of peace. It's got record levels of employment. It is booming in terms of its fintech industry. It's a agricultural powerhouse in the United Kingdom. It provides 10% of the food.
Let's not go crazy. Northern Ireland is still the poorest region of the UK, isn't it?
Well, let's look at the upside first. Yes, we have a legacy of the Troubles. We have a high level of economic inactivity, but we do have booming sectors in fintech and cybersecurity and agri-food. We're now actually, who would have thought that Northern Ireland was going to be a hub, an international hub for movie and filmmaking, which we are now. There are a number of dramas being made in Northern Ireland and Belfast as we speak. So Northern Ireland's a place transformed. We've a place to go yet. And I believe in Northern Ireland. And I think if we continue building the peace, unlocking our full potential, that Northern Ireland will thrive, the Union will thrive, but also the Ulster Unionist Party will thrive. And I've come in to bring change, to bring hope to the Unionist people. And I do believe the best days for the Ulster Unionist Party lie ahead.
That might be a high bar to meet. But I guess my question on this is, specifically, and I want to kind of focus on the Ulster Unionist Party in a little bit, but specifically on the Union, there is a very clear vision from nationalists of what a united Ireland would look like. That there's no lack of clarity, there's no lack of a vision there. If you were to transport yourself 100 years in the future of an imagined future where the Union persists, can you imagine looking back and saying, well, that was the point when we knew that Northern Ireland would last for another 100 years? What would that be?
Well, I'm not sure history ever works as simple as that, but I do think we're actually at a point in time when the case for the Union is more compelling than ever. Look, the world is more dangerous than ever. Geopolitical threats, Iran, Russia, North Korea. You have a war in Europe. You have the fact that the Iranians and Russians are involved in all kinds of attacks on the West. We have cables that run between Ireland and America, Project Kelvin, that keep us all connected. And actually, in these uncertain times, it is more important than ever that Northern Ireland remains part of the United Kingdom, part of NATO, with a strong military, with a part of GCHQ, with the member of NATO, with the fact that we have the Royal Navy able to protect the Atlantic. So, well, you say, the reality is the Irish have no strategy for their national defence. Irish coastal waters are unprotected, and they rely upon the United Kingdom. So when you start looking at things, I think we're at a point in time when anyone would think it was mad, irrational, to leave the safety and security of the NATO and the United Kingdom and join the defences of Ireland, which would leave the entire island of Ireland defenceless and a gaping hole in the Western Europe's defence. So I think, there's just one example of where history will show that being in the United Kingdom is a smart move.
You talk about that. I'm not entirely sure that Derry is that much safer than Donegal from attacks from either Iran or Russia. But putting that aside, defence, that's a reasonable topic to bring up. Is there any other case you can make for the Union?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look, we're at peace. And Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland have never been at more peace. Within Northern Ireland, bombings are record low, shootings are record low, disorders are record low, rioting's are record low, parade-related disputes are record low. Well, those statistics are fact. And here's the thing. Who wants to upset the apple cart when we have now an arrangement, a delicate constitutional arrangement on the Belfast Agreement that brings us peace? Most people in Northern Ireland want to be peaceful, prosperous, and live in an island that actually there is no visible border. Even the British Irish are both, and increasingly Northern Irish. So again, our peace is protected. Now, I could also talk about the economy. The fact that we're in a bigger economy than the Irish Republic, the fact that we're a member of the G7, we can set our interest rates. Look, what happened after the credit crunch? It was the United Kingdom that gave a bailout loan to the Irish Republic of 3.25 billion. So there's economic security, there's our own peace, and there's national security that come from being part of the United Kingdom.
You talk about economic security. In David McWilliam's book, he wrote that at the time of partition, two counties, Antrim and Down, constituted 75% of the GDP of the island of Ireland. So only two of the six counties on their own had an economy 3 times the size of the whole of the rest of the island, even discounting the other 4 counties in the north. That was a phenomenal ratio. And that was, of course, because that was the only place where there was industry. A large section of the rest of the country was
building.
Yeah, and the rest of the country was, large sections of the rest of the country were essentially subsistence farming. That has turned around to a phenomenal degree, and it's almost difficult to get a handle on the numbers, but that would indicate that over that century or a bit more, there has been economic growth of something like 30 times faster in the south than in the north. That doesn't indicate that being part of the union is advantageous for the north economically.
Well, here's the reality. Where would we be if we didn't have the security of the United Kingdom economically? Whenever this country was tearing itself apart, when there was a bombing campaign, when there was a shooting campaign, when there was troubles were raging, that economic inactivity was high, the cost of security was through the roof. Public sector were massively expanding, private sector was contracting, inward investment wasn't coming in because of the Troubles, tourism wasn't coming in. So actually we were through a horrendous period of the Troubles. We're out of that now. And now's the time actually Northern Ireland has an opportunity that's unrivaled to grow its private economy, deal with economic inactivity, to attract people from all around the world to what is a great tourist destination. So look, I understand that the Republic have done very well. That's why I'm calling, for example, for the United Kingdom government to lower VAT on hospitality, on VAT for hospitality and tourism, so we can compete better with the Irish Republic. You've done very well because you've actually cut taxes. You've got low corporation tax. You've made your country attractive to inward investment. That's what I want to do for Northern Ireland, and I believe we can do it, have the best of both worlds by being both Northern Irish and part of the United Kingdom.
Are you Irish?
Well, look, I'm first of all British, Northern Irish, an Ulsterman, and I'm also Irish. Yeah, I'm very comfortable with all of those things.
Not everybody in the North is. And I spoke to Jamie Bryson, who I'm sure you're aware of, on this podcast a few years ago. I have the advantage of being able to see you on Zoom, and I saw that smile. I'll just let the listeners know that. But I talked to Jamie Bryson, and it was very noticeable that he wasn't willing to even discuss any aspect of nationalism in any way. And I actually think he made sense, because there is a quote, and it might be apocryphally attributed to Napoleon, but the point being made was that once you have even contemplated defeat, all is lost. Once you start planning for what they would see as defeat, then you've lost everything. Is he right? Or would it be rational for unionists, even if unionists don't believe that there should be or that there will be a united Ireland? Is it rational for unionists to engage or to refuse to engage in discussing what a united Ireland might look like?
Well, I distinguish two things. First of all, I'm happy to discuss and debate the merits of the Union versus the United Ireland. So I've been on programs doing that, but I've no interest in having a theoretical discussion about what a United Ireland looks like. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think any of us alive will see it happen. All my energy goes to making Northern Ireland work.
Are you a little bit on Jamie Bryson's side there? So I guess essentially what I'm asking is, I think, purely for practical reasons, that nationalists should talk to unionists and to say, hey, if you were in a united Ireland, what are the fears you would have? What would be the least acceptable things? And to try, I think it would be rational for nationalists to try to address that. And I think on one level, it would be rational for unionists to offer that information. But on another level, it is rational for somebody like Jamie Bryson to say they're not going to engage with that in any way, because that is the route to defeat. So am I understanding that you are maybe more along the Jamie Bryson position than on an engagement with nationalist position on that particular topic?
Well, look, here's what I'll say. Whenever I engage with nationalism, it is to advance the merits of the United Kingdom and us being a member of the United Kingdom, but also to work out how we can work with our neighbours to make Northern Ireland thrive. But I mean, I actually think it might be rational. If you're talking about rationality, it'd be rational for Sinn Féin to have a discussion with the Republican electorate about why their United Ireland isn't going to come. Because they sold them a myth when they signed the Belfast Agreement and they give up their violence, which is, of course, the right thing to do. It should never have happened. The United Ireland was going to come. It isn't coming. And I actually think the rational discussion is for nationalism to say, what are we going to do?
Sure, yeah, and that's a bit of a kind of a whataboutery there. So, you can advocate for that, but answer my question first. Both of them could be rational, but which side would you come down on? Refusing to engage in discussing any of the nuts and bolts of unity, or protecting your interests of unionists post-unity, even if it's a theoretical?
I don't see the point in wasting time with this theoretical.
Okay,
so I'm not going to do it.
That's a fair enough answer. There are several, perhaps not in politics, but there are unionists who have done that and have said what would and would not be more and less objectionable to them. If you don't want to engage in it, that's a rational position. But it's interesting to hear that. Dealing specifically with the Ulster Unionist Party, as opposed to the union itself. I asked which is in worse shape, but there is no question that the Ulster Unionist Party has been brought low, and I think you've acknowledged it yourself, compared to the 60-70% of the vote that it got, in the 1940s, 50s, even into the 60s. You, I think it would be fair to say, are being politically squeezed, and in your own constituency, which is North Antrim, which is most of the county of Antrim, for people who want to picture that. So it's basically County Antrim minus the East Coast and minus Belfast. You are being squeezed on one side by the DUP and the TUV, the Traditional Unionist Voice, who would be much more hardline unionists. And on the other side, the Alliance Party, which also says that it is a non-sectarian party, perhaps more credibly so than the Ulster Unionist Party. But would you agree that it's difficult for you to make a step either to be more hardline unionist or more non-sectarian, because you're likely to lose voters on one side or the other either way?
Look, I have a great belief that the vast majority of people in our country believe in common sense, decency, fairness, doing the right thing, rational politics, growing our economy, having strong national security, creating jobs, creating opportunity, having a justice system that keeps people safe and locks up people who are in danger. I think they're things that actually transcend all of what you've been discussing. I see the Ulster Unionist Party as sitting actually as an opportunity to our left and to our right to make gains. So I suppose you see it as we're being squeezed. I see it as that we have opportunity to expand either way. I'm an optimist. I come into the Ulster Unionist Party to return it to the pinnacle of leadership in unionism. I want to eclipse the DUP. I'm on target to do that, I believe. And then I want us to return to be the biggest party in Northern Ireland. And they're my two objectives, and I'm confident we'll achieve them.
On one side, in civic society, not so much in politics, as I mentioned, there are some unionists who are engaging with nationalists on what a united Ireland might look like.
If they're unionists, some of them, when I listen to them, I'm not convinced they're unionists at all.
Well, let's say people from a PUL background, from that community, and I don't want to necessarily label people. There's also a large section of the population who, a few weeks back, were out on the streets, burning down houses, stopping cars, trying to see if anybody looked a bit foreign inside. How does that make you feel?
Well, look, I don't think there were large numbers. There were people on the street, as you had in Dublin, as you had across Western Europe. I call them traitors. I'm a law-abiding citizen. If you target people in my country on the basis of their skin colour and you chase them out of a hospital when they're treating our citizens because they're nurses who are a different colour than you, you are a traitor, not the person you're chasing out. So I was ashamed by those who burnt down a bus, by those who targeted people's homes, who caused families to run out of the back of their home in fear. They are the traitors, they're not patriots. And I stand by the law-abiding migrants in our country who've come in, who work hard, who actually keep our NHS on its feet, who provide skills that we don't have, provide labour that we don't have, and contribute to our society. So I can't be any clearer where I stand on that. But of course, what you can do is have a different conversation about illegal migration, about how the levels of migration, about how we deal with asylum and the speed of it. They're all different issues of public policy, which I think we do need to have conversations about. But I need to separate that from illegality targeted to people because of their colour. I don't accept it. I condemn it. I can't be any clearer about it.
I'm sure there's a huge chunk of the, let's say, PUL population, without labeling them politically, but people who come from, what would generally be called a unionist background. I'm sure there's a huge chunk of the population who would agree with that. Why would they vote for the UUP as opposed to the Alliance Party?
Well, look, the Alliance Party aren't the party they used to be. They've went woke. They're chasing all kinds of daft ideas. They've been disastrous in the ministries they hold. The Justice Ministry is held by Naomi Long. We've got record levels of violence against women and girls. The police service are at record low levels because there's been a failure to properly resource them. The Minister for Agriculture is the other ministry they hold. There's been a no confidence vote in the Alliance Party by the Ulster Farmers Union. It's actually been on the Department of Agriculture. So the Alliance Party have underperformed in government. They've increasingly went down a really woke agenda. And I think they've drifted from the party that they were. And I think,
okay, that's a party political speech, and that sounds like a campaigning stump. But the reality is that
I am a politician.
alliance. You are indeed now, yes, and that's fair enough. But my point is that they are increasingly successful, and they do not have the baggage of unionism. I was actually very interested to hear you say that the Ulster Unionist Party is a non-sectarian party. It not
is under my leadership.
We shall see. You've only been 6 months in the job, so you will have a chance to prove that. But that's certainly not how it would have been seen historically.
Well, if you're going right back to the past, David Trimble said, I think it was in the speech when he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize. I could be wrong on that, but he certainly gave a speech. He said, look, unionism built a strong house, but it was a cold house for Catholics. Nationalists, I would accept that. The state was not always run the way it should be, with gerrymandering, with discrimination in employment. I don't pretend that we were faultless. But this is a changed place. People are treated fairly. You have nationalists now at the top level of politics. We have First Minister who's nationalists. We have nationalists in top levels in the law, media, businesses. This is a place utterly transformed. And the Ulster Unionist Party is non-sectarian. And I'll tell you, I've made it very clear, if I find someone who was being sectarian in my party, I would eject them.
You have 9 MLAs, you have 50-odd councillors, and you have 1 MP. What proportion of them are Catholics?
Of them, I don't know. I mean, look, and if it's 1 or 2.
Are you aware of any of them who are Catholics?
We have Catholic members. We have members.
No, are you aware of any? So you've got about 60 or 70 elected
I'm not aware of any being Catholics, no, and I haven't asked them.
Okay. That's fair if you
can
see...
I can see, and if you ask the TUV or DUP, you'll find their elected representatives are probably 100% Protestant. If you ask Sinn Féin, they're certainly 100% Catholic. I
don't think so.
In Northern Ireland?
At least 1 Protestant was elected for Sinn Féin in the Dáil, going back some time.
Okay, we're going back some time, and that's across the whole Ireland of Ireland. So, but if you want to go back historically, we had an MLA, Jon Gorman, who was a Catholic. We have had Catholic MLAs.
Yes.
But we don't have enough Catholics supporting us. And I want to actually transcend that and say, look, let's not vote on the basis of religion. Let's not vote on the basis of even what your constitutional view is. Because that is just something you can vote for in a border poll. I want you to vote on whether you believe in strong law and order, whether you believe in a strong economy, whether you believe in policies that allow our children to thrive in school, whether you want childcare given so that our young parents can go and have great careers. If you believe in those things, I want you to vote for me and my party, regardless of your religion. Your religion is no interest to me, other than I'll make sure you have the right to practice it.
What party would you be in if you lived in Kent?
I probably would be, and I'm going to caveat this. I probably would be a One Nation Conservative.
Okay, and what party would you be if you lived in Kildare?
I haven't given that any thought. I haven't given it a single thought. Don't know.
That's fair enough. You talk about the union and how that seems to be a high-ish priority, but you clearly have other priorities as well. I should say, for maybe people who are not so familiar with it, a One Nation Conservative would be people who were Conservatives prior to Margaret Thatcher, and who, also in the vein of Michael Heseltine, who were not hardcore pro-privatisation, maybe would be viewed as more moderate, and certainly not in the vein of the Boris Johnsons and the Rishi Sunaks. Would that be a fair description?
Well, I think Boris is maybe an outlier. I have a lot of respect for Margaret Thatcher. I think times have changed, because a lot of things that were radical under Thatcher would now be actually quite normal. Privatisation. We wouldn't dream now of putting under public ownership lots of things it used to be. So, look, I'm probably on the centre to the slight centre right of UK politics, and that would have me very comfortable in a David Cameron, that sort of prime minister. I'd be very comfortable in that sort of politics.
What proportion of, will I even say, Northern Ireland does that represent?
It's always very hard to tell. I think if you ask people in Northern Ireland how they would vote nationally, I don't know what sort of answer you would get. Even more complex now with reform.
It's true, isn't it, that if you put aside party affiliations and indeed sectarian affiliations in the north, the Irish electorate, north and south, is really very left-wing compared to most of continental Europe.
Yes, I would suggest that Northern Ireland, and I agree with you, the island of Ireland is more left wing.
Centre left. I'm not talking about Trotskyism or the dictatorship of the proletariat, but in terms of policies on economics at high level, most people in Ireland, north and south, if you asked either the average Sinn Féin voter or DUP voter or SDLP voter, they would come somewhere at the middle of the British Labour Party in terms of their political centre. That would be true, wouldn't it?
Across Ireland, yes. I'm not sure about the DUP.
I'm talking about their voters. I doubt if their members would do, or their elected members certainly would do that.
It's a tricky one, and I think there's been shifts recently. So it's a very hard one to pick and put down. But I gave you the broad point that Ireland is more left wing generally than continental Europe, and perhaps more aligned to, for example, Scotland. Mm-hmm. Than England, of course. But then in England, of course, you have a sort of a split between the north and the south. Yep. So, it's a very complex picture. I just tend to find that ordinary people, when you meet them mm-hmm. and actually talk about the things that they believe in, I think sit somewhere in a sort of 5 to 7. If 0 is your far left and 10 is your far right, I think most people sit in 5 to 7. And I'd said the political elites and the media commentary and all of that.
So further to the right?
I actually think that, yes. Okay. And certainly with unionist people, 5 to 7 is the kind of the sweet spot. And that's where I am. Look, I believe in compassion, but I believe also we need to make work pay. I believe in immigration, but I believe it because we need to have the skills coming in. But I also believe in secure borders. Most people in Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom, I dare say increasingly across Europe, they want common sense. They want fairness, they want opportunity. And I think these things transcend left and right and other ideologies.
The ideology of the country, and I don't mean that, kind of political party members, but the individuals, which can differ quite a lot, as I think we see often from the people that they vote for, that's important. And there's also a cultural movement is the wrong word, but there's sort of a cultural drift that is important, that informs politics. And politics can defy that, I think, for a while, but only for a while. Given that, would you agree that you've made your point that you think that the United Ireland is unlikely, but the cultural drift, you would have to agree, is towards a United Ireland?
No, I don't.
No?
I don't. I think it's the opposite. I think what has happened.
I'm looking at one thing. I'm looking at one of the Lord Ashcroft polls, and there's obviously a split between preferring the UK, preferring a United Ireland. But when you break that down by demography, the only demographic band, the only age band that has a unionist majority is the over 65s. If you look at 45 to 65, it's split almost evenly. It's a tiny nationalist majority. If you look at 25 to 45, there's about a 10% nationalist majority, a 10-point advantage for nationalists. If you look at 18 to 24s, there's a 20-point. So if you arrange those demographically, that's basically steps of a stairs of nationalism being more preferred as you go into the younger age bands. That does not support your theory on that, does it?
Well, I take a different view. I think United Ireland is romantic. It's about change and aspiration. It fits, as you say, kind of a cultural ideal around music and poetry, and you combine that with the fact that their politicians are younger. They've been more adept at using social media, TikTok. So I think that there's an attraction for younger people to
That
United
is true,
Ireland.
but that's important in the long term, isn't it?
It is important. And that's why one of the reasons I came into politics was to try and connect with those younger people better, start using things like TikTok and things that unionist politicians weren't doing. Because there's a thought that, social media is for young people. Well, most people on Facebook are actually 30 to 60. Young people aren't on Facebook.
Facebook is not for young people.
They're on TikTok and Insta. So, and I slightly digress. But here's the thing. Perhaps the other point of your statistic is to say that as people get older, they actually get more conservative about constitutional change as they build up their assets and they've got families and they've got mortgages or they've savings and they've pensions. They actually think, you know what? Why on earth would I vote for constitutional revolution? So what is actually the case? And look, I put it like this: if you asked people in 1970 by age whether they'd vote Tory or Labour, all those under 40
British people you're talking about.
British people, the vast majority of them would vote Labour.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so there's a demographic shift. Yeah, so there's an age shift as you go. People don't go from being nationalist to being unionist. The reality is the nationalist population is far younger. That is true, isn't it?
But the birth rate also has now stalled. And actually, no, one of the problems we have.
But the emigration rate hasn't. And the outward migration rate of unionists is far higher.
It is. And one of the things I want to deal.
It is perhaps incorrect to say, but it is a vision that has an element of truth in it. Unionists who are smart, who go to university, typically go to university in Britain and often don't come back, or at best come back and are not terribly impressed by unionism, which perhaps feeds into what you saw in loyalist mobs burning down houses and whatever some weeks back, that the unionists who stay are not the people who have the greatest intellectual ambitions. That is true, isn't it?
Well, that's a big generalization. Of course, we have.
It is a big generalization, and I'm sure there are many, many exceptions, but that is a trend.
Let me just deal with the exceptions, because we have a highly skilled workforce. We've got world-leading workforce in cybersecurity, fintech, agri-food, and advanced manufacturing. In fact, there's companies coming to Northern Ireland because increasingly they see the skill and the talent that we have here in Northern Ireland. So we have a lot of innate talent, but we do.
Sure, and there are exceptions. But deal with the generalization.
No,
John.
I'll deal with
the generalization. There is some truth in that, isn't there?
There is truth in the fact that if you're a unionist, you tend to see things in more east-west terms. And therefore you feel comfortable in going to university in Britain, because it's not really leaving your country. You're going over there, your parents might visit you. And yes, you settle there, you find a wife or a husband there or whatever combination, you get a job there and you settle there and you feel comfortable and you mightn't come back. It's one of the reasons why I joined politics, is we need to deal with the brain drain. And the brain drain is not good for Northern Ireland, but it's not good for the union. So look, you do raise a lot of issues that have legitimacy. I just see them through the other end of the telescope. And I see them as challenges that we need to overcome. But I am a great believer in Northern Ireland. I'm a believer in its people. And I believe we're going to be world class if we have the right politicians and the right policies.
You say that, unionists, for example, who leave school in the north, or people from a unionist background, I don't want to pigeonhole people, go and they don't feel like they're leaving their country when they go to college in Britain, for example, to take that generalization.
Yeah.
They may not feel like they're leaving their country. And PUL, the L is loyalism, and the origin of that phrase is loyal to the crown, to the royal family. But however loyalists are to Britain isn't terribly loyal to them. So when those people, young people from a PUL background, end up in Britain, most British people just see them as Irish. And that can be an eye-opening revelation. Isn't that the case?
Yes, they do. I think there's an increasing recognition of Northern Ireland. But look, yes, they often see us as Irish. Some people, look, that is what it is.
Yeah, but deal with the issue that Britain is not nearly as loyal to the loyalists as the reverse.
Well, yeah, you have an element of truth in that, and it's one of the reasons why I try and argue why Northern Ireland brings benefits to the UK. We're part of its food security. We help its national security, but I think we need to do a better job of selling to the rest of the United Kingdom the value that Northern Ireland brings and the value that we are as four nations united in one country. But people can sometimes say, "Oh, the Brits don't love you." First of all, my allegiance is not to any particular British person or to the government of the day. It is to the United Kingdom, which transcends who's in power and who lives in the UK now.
Mm-hmm.
We have shown our loyalty through wars. The reality is that the UK has stood by Northern Ireland. It has a very generous subvention of billions of pounds.
I would suggest that's dodgy statistics, but I don't want to get diverted into that. I'm more
You're
interested
saying we're self-sufficient.
I don't think any country is self-sufficient, but I will come back to that issue if you wish to. But deal with the point that Britain, however much you may want to change it, is not nearly as loyal to the loyalists as the reverse. That is true, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we see it as our loyalty to them. They look, it's a numbers game. There are many different dynamics at play, but deep down, I think most people in the United Kingdom who believe in the Union want to keep it together. And I think it's for the United Kingdom, it's for the Unionists in the United Kingdom to make the case for the Union. But here's the beauty of the Belfast Agreement, which my party negotiated and delivered. It is for the people of Northern Ireland alone to determine our future. And we will remain as part of the United Kingdom until a majority here say otherwise. And neither the bombs of the IRA nor any arguments that people throw at us can change that. We're now a country of peace. We're increasingly going to be prosperous. We're making the case for why Northern Ireland.
Okay, you said this.
Well,
you said this.
It is, but I come to this point. It really doesn't matter if there is a mismatch in the affection levels, east and west.
Okay, but pause on that for a second. Pause on that for a second then. Because, for example, when Karen Bradley, Conservative Party Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, which is basically the member of the British cabinet, so a cabinet minister in the UK government whose responsibility is Northern Ireland, when she arrived in her job, note when she arrived, not before, when she arrived in her job, she expressed wonderment that unionists and nationalists vote for different parties. She was entirely unaware of that. And one thing dealing with your own predecessor that I thought was really notable, when David Trimble died, that was a clear the decks story on RTE. The RTE website removed everything, and that was the only story, not just the lead story. It was the only story above the fold on the RTE News website. But David Trimble was a member of the House of Lords. He was a member of the Privy Council, which I'm not going to go into the details, but it's an important part of the British constitutional setup, and Nobel Peace Prize winner, and a very significant person in politics. His death didn't appear on the BBC News website at all. That says an awful lot about how much Britain cares is the wrong word, but how much they're even interested in the affairs of Northern Ireland, doesn't it?
That's very anecdotal. I mean, we are 3% of the population of the United Kingdom. We're not going to monopolise the coverage over there, but here's the reality.
Sure, but David Trimble was a huge figure.
He was a huge figure.
Ireland.
He's rightly recognised. If there's been a oversight in the amount of recognition he got in Great Britain after his death, that's regrettable. But, you can talk about inch columns in the newspaper. But here's the reality. When Northern Ireland was going through an horrendous time during the Troubles, hundreds of soldiers from Britain laid down their life for us. The United Kingdom poured billions into security. They still provide, despite your analysis, a very significant subvention to Northern Ireland. So we are very much part of the United Kingdom. I increasingly want to see Northern Ireland put back into the UK because I think we're such a talented workforce and so much going for us. But look, the fact that when someone dies, they don't get the column inches that they deserve.
No, but that's emblematic. I mean, I could give 100 other examples.
Well, I can give you another example.
Just doesn't register.
Jeffrey Donaldson, that case, which was the headline news in Northern Ireland for weeks. Someone who was a senior MP, leader of a political party, Privy Councillor, trade envoy for the United Kingdom in Cameroon and Egypt. When he was convicted of paedophilia and is going to face up to maybe life imprisonment, it's barely featured in the national news either. So look,
in Britain, but that was the headline news on RT and in the south.
So I accept that often what happens here does not get the coverage that it merits nationally. But look, that is what it is. That's not a clinch factor for me in deciding whether I want to be part of the United Kingdom.
Looking into your crystal ball, what will happen if Nigel Farage becomes Prime Minister in Britain?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of ifs, and
Well, but sure, why not?
why not? Look, here's the thing with Nigel Farage. I worry about the caliber and competence and the of all of the members who would become Reform MPs, because when you go from having whatever it is, 3 or 4 or 5 MPs to having 300, you're going to have all kinds of people with all kinds of histories that haven't been checked.
That's a big problem. And sorry, I just want to, because I think listeners might not be up to speed on that. In the event that the Reform were to win an election in a couple of years' time, in Nigel Farage's Reform UK Party, they would then have something like 150 to 200 ministerial and more junior positions to fill, and almost every single one of them would be somebody who had never been in Parliament and probably never in politics before, and that would be a huge skills gap.
Challenge.
But leaving that aside, reading just recently, all 8 of their current MPs, of whom 2 are former Conservative Party cabinet members, so the most senior ministers, Braverman and Jenrick, all 8 of them signed a proposal to make an amendment to make it a criminal offence to produce an election leaflet in the Irish language with potential prison sentence for that. Now, I don't think that's because Suella Braverman or Robert Jenrick or Nigel Farage want to put people in jail for speaking Irish. I think they did that because they hate ethnic minorities in Britain and they don't want leaflets to be produced in Bengali or Hindi or Urdu or whatever. And they said, they proposed this law to not allow any leaflets that are in any language other than English or Welsh. And it just didn't cross their minds that this might be slightly controversial in Ireland. Is that not a reasonable interpretation?
Actually, first I've heard of that proposed law, which sounds daft, but look, reform for me, principally.
Take the point. Their party and both Braverman and Jenrick, who were cabinet members, senior ministers, signed it.
Look, Reform are primarily a nationalist, English nationalist party.
Yeah, exactly.
Their interests are in English nationalism.
Yes.
They're not, in my view, UK unionism. And therefore I have concerns about them. But I have concerns about many British governments. The same way as I have many concerns about Irish governments in down south. So, look, we'll have to deal with Farage if he becomes Prime Minister. We'll have to deal with Reform if they become the government. But there's many a slip between the cup and lip, and I have no idea who's going to win the next election. But won't define.
It's very difficult to see any government being formed without them.
That's true. But look, things can change very fast.
If you had an MP, you are likely to have at least one MP, perhaps not yourself, but no doubt you would discuss their strategy. If Nigel Farage was 1 vote short, might the Ulster Unionist Party provide that vote?
For what, forming a government?
Yeah.
Look, it's so speculative. I mean, it is so speculative. I would dare to say that we are not there to prop up a Nigel Farage government. But who knows what instability you're facing? Who knows what's going on? And I mean, it's so many moving parts there. But the Ulster Unionist Party...
Sure, yeah, but you address the principle.
I have significant concerns about a Reform government. So asking me whether we would be the final...
You know what? So do I. So do lots of us. But we may have to deal with it. And I think 2 things are being maybe under-regarded or not taken sufficiently serious in terms of the existence of the UK. One of which was that unquestionably one of the reasons for the success, to the degree that it was successful, of the independence referendum in Scotland was Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson drove a lot of the yes vote, the pro-independence vote in Scotland. That vote, if you look at the polls, trended downwards when Labour got into power, trended back upwards as the threat of reform is coming up. But the other thing that I think is that's being perhaps not getting enough attention is that all along, for 10 or 20 years, if you had polled independence in Scotland, it was 20-25%. Once the independence poll was announced, once there was reality to it, that jumped from about 25% to about 45%. So 20% of the population in Scotland became nationalists overnight. I don't think that's really realistic. I think that what happened was that they went from having a vague aspiration to thinking that it could be real, even however unrealistic that referendum was. And that switched a chunk of the population, which has never switched back. And since that referendum, 12 years ago, support for independence has wavered between about 45 and 55%. We now have an SNP government, fifth time in a row, re-elected in Scotland. And for the first time ever, the Labour Party has lost an election in Wales. And you have Rhiannon Beorth of Plaid Cymru, the Welsh Nationalist Party, as the First Minister in Wales. If you also get Nigel Farage, who I think you're 100% correct to say is an English nationalist, that doesn't really augur well for the union. That doesn't support your faith in it, does it?
Look, I believe in the union. I believe when people go into the ballot box and they're making an existential decision, they will err on the side of remaining part of the United Kingdom. And look, I've heard this in Northern Ireland. Oh, if there's credit crunch, that's going to benefit Irish Republic. As a Celtic Tiger, that's going to push us towards pro-union, pro-United Ireland. Then it was Brexit was going to be the deadly changer. Oh, Brexit's a historic disaster and we're going to end up with United Ireland. And I think a lot of that applies to Scottish nationalism too. The reality is there was a referendum and to a clear majority, wasn't overwhelming, but it was clear. The people of Scotland voted to remain part of the United Kingdom. I think Scots are canny. I think they'll realise the arguments I've made about national security and all of that. Of course, remember, whenever the Scottish were pushing forward their referendum arguments and their economics, had they actually got independence at that time, their economy would have tanked because North Sea oil tanked in value. So people are better together. This desire that people have to rip up the United Kingdom, to see land borders put between England, Scotland and Wales. And of course, what I don't understand is you get the Sinn Féin who say, there's no border in the island of Ireland, you can't see it from space. At the same time, they want to put a border between Scotland and England.
I don't think Sinn Féin have an opinion on that.
Well, I think Sinn Féin, you see Michelle O'Neill talking often about wanting to be working with other nationalist parties. She wants to lead them. The reality is this: the United Kingdom has weathered greater storms, and we will weather greater storms in the future. I believe in our country. I also want us to have the best relationship possible with the Irish Republic. I'm sorry the Irish Republic left the United Kingdom. It's often seen as Northern Ireland left the Irish Republic, but the Republic of Ireland left the United Kingdom. I think that's sad. I think have got so much in common between two islands. We should have the closest relationship, but I do believe we will weather any storm. And as long as we make the case for the union, we have sensible politics. I think the union has a strong future. And look, a reformed government will bring its own challenges, but we have to confront them, and we have to make sure that we do protect our country. And I believe our country's got a bright future.
There's a small sliver of people who are distinctly PUL, from a Protestant Unionist loyalist background, who have moved over to supporting United Ireland. What would you say to them?
Look, I say this to them. This is a democracy. They can make their own decisions. I can tell you there are far more people who are from a Catholic nationalist background who support United, us staying in the United Kingdom. Every opinion poll shows that. The amount, if you want to, and I don't like to be Protestant Catholic because it's not the way I was brought up, and I see everyone as equals. But if you look at those who are Protestant and ask them who would support United Ireland, it's fairly negligible. If you ask people in the Catholic community who would support staying in the United Kingdom, it's actually quite a sizable minority, even those who vote for the SDLP and Sinn Féin. So look, there's a lot of noise about the 5 or 6 people in the unionist community who get signed up for this Agreed Ireland stuff. They probably, I don't know, sometimes get some money from the Department of Foreign Affairs, I hear, but perhaps that. Well,
I don't think so.
I think there's a few.
That's a cheap shot.
Honestly, I think it is. I think Department of Foreign Affairs might well fund some of the people. It's not a cheap shot. I mean, I know some of them, and I quite like them. But look, I think their analysis is wrong, and I think they get disillusioned with politics and then look for something shiny and new. And what's shiny and new is United Ireland, when actually we need to make things work better in Northern Ireland. So, look, there are a few people who've went down the line of promoting an agreed Ireland, a united Ireland, a new Ireland. But there are far more Catholics in Northern Ireland who actually believe in the Union. And they might feel Irish.
But there's an inherent advantage there because most people don't like upsetting the status quo.
100%, which is one of the reasons I have, not complacency, but I am optimistic about the case for the United Kingdom. I think if you had a border poll today, unionism would win at 70-30.
What do you think about putting up Irish language signs in Belfast Central Station?
Well, there are two things. Let me just nail Irish language. First of all, I have no issue with the Irish language as any language. In fact, I often holiday in parts of Donegal that are Irish speaking, and I love all culture. Let me answer your question two ways. First of all, there's a nonsense in Northern Ireland. We're spending huge amounts of money on Irish language signs in street signs, when actually it only requires 15% of the people in the street to vote for it. 85% can say no and still goes up. That's the first thing.
Roll back, you were saying that they are spending an awful lot of money on street signs. I didn't catch whether you said they are or not.
There's an expenditure going out in street signs
which is an awful lot of money.
Well, it's the taxpayers' money, it's the ratepayers' money, so it's significant.
And you think it's a significant amount of money in terms of the overall government spend?
Well, I think every penny that you take from the public should be wisely spent.
That wasn't what you said. You said an awful lot of money being spent on Irish language.
Well, it's in relative terms, but there's a lot of energy and time wasted in this. When most people want us to fund health services, they want us to deal with waiting lists, they want us to deal with the potholes in the road. I mean, look, I spoke to someone recently who's actually they were an SDLP voter who's now going to vote for the Ulster Unionist Party, and they live in a road with potholes on it. And there were people putting Irish language signs up with 15% of the people voted for them and 85% of the people were opposed to them. And they had a shiny new Irish language sign, but they damaged the car in a pothole. And it summed up the nonsense that we're having around the Irish language. I just don't think that public funds should be prioritised in signs for Irish language. It's in terms of Grand Central, we've joined a judicial review about that, about the Irish language signs in Grand Central, because there's an issue of procedure around how the
Belfast Central, I think you mean.
Yeah, Belfast Central, about how the infrastructure minister is dealing with that.
So you're part of the legal case to
part of the legal case,
prevent having Irish language signs in Belfast Central Station.
Now, let me be very clear. There's a very significant issue of procedure because it's a cross-cutting matter. It should have had executive support, cross-executive support, and it didn't. It was done as a solo run by the minister. And that goes against some of the protections in our assembly. So on a procedural basis, we have voted against that. But I'll tell you what you need in the new train station. When you get off that train, there should be digital signs that have rolling in different languages. And based on the languages,
that isn't what's at dispute. It's things like pointing. It's not the
that's what you should have.
Train displays.
But in all of those signs that you see, why should it be that an Irish language sign is there? It should actually be in Polish. Then it should change to Chinese and Irish.
No, but you're talking about a different thing, which is the live displays of the trains. This is signs pointing people towards particular exits or towards the toilets or whatever.
But even those could be digitized and have numerous different languages on them. But look, the minister went on a solo run with this. But look, I said when I first became leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, I'm not interested in culture wars. If people want to learn Irish, that's fine. There's a Fleadh Cheoil coming to Belfast. I will be there having a look and experiencing that. When the Fleadh came to Londonderry, first time it came to the UK, 2013, I oversaw the policing operation to make sure it was safe and effective. I have no objection to the Irish language whatsoever. But on the new Belfast Central Station, procedure hasn't been followed. That's an important safeguard. And as a general point to say this, we are spending money and time and energy discussing Irish signs. When
Mm-hmm.
people have potholes in the roads, they don't have grit in the grit boxes when there's a snap of cold weather. They can't get access to a dentist. They can't get access to the NHS. They ring their GP and they're told they're 40th in queue.
Mm-hmm.
These are the things we should be focused on. And frankly, that's where my focus is going to be.
Okay. What do you think of kneecap?
I don't think much of them.
Why not?
I don't like their references to drugs. I don't like their references to Land Rovers and fire. I haven't listened to their music, so I couldn't tell you much about the
They've
music.
brought a huge amount of cultural cachet to Belfast and places like that.
And fair play to them. I was in the Pays now. Fortunately, some colleagues of mine and those who served in the police service, the Royal Constabulary, throughout the Troubles, were burnt alive in Land Rovers. So when you see a Land Rover on fire, police Land Rover, it doesn't really enamour me. And by the way, if there was a loyalist group called Kneecap or some equivalent, I wouldn't support them either. Or if there was a group called the Ku Klux Klan, who had pictures of people with a white sheet over their head, joking about.
I think to be
people.
fair to Kneecap, they are very much in favour of defending the rights of people on both sides of the community.
Yeah, well, that's right. Yeah, I'm sure they are. It just doesn't attract me. But if people want to listen to Kneecap, they can. But it's a switch off for me when I see a police Land Rover on fire, or people with balaclavas on. I don't care whether they're loyalist, Republican, or just organised criminals. That's not the sort of music I'm interested in. I'm going to a Bon Jovi concert in Dublin. I look forward to that. I'll not be going to a Kneecap concert.
You said you hadn't given any thought to who you might vote for if you lived in Kildare as opposed to Kent. But given that most of the listeners are in the south, if you had to communicate a message directly to people, voters, as opposed to politicians in the south, what would be the most important thing you'd want to say to them?
What I want to say to them is that Northern Ireland is a wonderful place. First of all, I want to see more tourists come from the Republic of Ireland to Northern Ireland. It's a safe place to be a tourist. Whenever you hear things on TV like riots, they are confined to a few streets. We have an amazing scenery. We have amazing hospitality. We have a great workforce. I want you to come here. I want to be great neighbours with you. I want to cooperate with you. I want to build wealth across the Isle of Ireland with you. If there are things that we can work well together in health and education, in our waterways, I want to do all of those things to make the people of Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland as safe and as prosperous and as happy and as secure as possible. There's no hostility. But I am British. I believe in United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And I would say one final thing. With all of that positivity I have towards the Irish Republic, and by the way, I holiday there myself. I have family there. My nieces live there. I have great friends there. I had a great relationship with the Irish, the Garda Síochána. I would say one thing, though. I would love to see the Irish Republic do something about its conduct during the Troubles in terms of things like refusing extradition of people to that the state here were seeking extradited who committed crimes against people in Northern Ireland and Great Britain. 97% of them were rejected. And I thought that was political. It's caused hurt. And I think it would be an act of leadership for Michael Martin to apologise for that back to the Irish state.
Jon Burrows, leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you, William.
Well, William, we've just finished the interview with Jon Burrows. Were you surprised by anything that Jon said in that interview?
I think the one thing I wasn't prepared for was he said the Ulster Unionist Party was a non-sectarian party. Even if he had said that he aspired to that, it might have been more realistic. But I think that's not the experience of most people in the North.
Yeah, it was surprising that he couldn't name any Catholics in the party.
Yeah, I just had a chance to look that up. He mentioned John Gorman, who was an MLA, a member of the Assembly, elected in 1998, who served one term. The Ulster Unionist Party has had a total of 124 people elected to the Assembly since it was established. That's double counting some people who were elected multiple times. But of that, one Catholic was elected once. So that's a lot less than 1%. And the Ulster Unionists, I think they have 51 councillors at the moment. They've obviously had many hundreds down through the years. And John wasn't able to name any other Catholics at all that he was aware of. That's obviously a legacy of the history of Northern Ireland, but I don't think that's very consistent with the concept of the Ulster Unionist Party being non-sectarian. And I should say, I had a chance to look up, I couldn't think of her name in the moment. Violet Ann Wynne was elected in County Clare for Sinn Féin in 2020, although she later left the party. I have asked Sinn Féin, did they have or do they have any other elected representatives who are Protestants or from any other minority religion? They haven't got back to me, but if they do, we'll put it in the notes for the podcast.
On the topic of being non-sectarian, maybe I might tell you something that maybe surprised me a little bit. And I know I'm going a little bit against the Here's How policy of trying to bring light rather than heat here. But when you were bringing up the issue of the Irish language, I know it's not maybe not the most vicious opinion someone can hold on this island. It's it's not, there aren't lives at stake or anything like that. But taking an uncompromising view of the Irish language or being hostile to it, to me that's so unreasonable. And I thought John seemed quite reasonable throughout the interview.
Yeah.
But this is something I find difficult. It kind of frustrates me. It seems like it's something that like if you're not willing to compromise on this issue, then politics kind of has to just work around you. You're not someone we are working with. It's something that we're working around. Am I being unfair?
I don't think you are. I think that's very, very difficult to justify. You could hear some of the rhetoric from the North, probably unfortunate rhetoric coming through when he said a huge amount of money was being spent on signs in the Belfast Central train station because they were in Irish. I think that's A, ludicrous, and B, it does come across as very, very mean-spirited. And John said in the interview, but I didn't really highlight it, there is a court case going through the High Court in Belfast because, as John said, they take the view that the decision to literally, have a sign for the toilets saying toilets Leharis rather than just saying toilets is a decision that must be made by the entire executive, effectively the cabinet, rather than just a single minister. He said this was a solo run on the part of the minister. That seems very, very petty. And I'm just seeing on BBC today, given the Fleadh running in Belfast at the moment, someone charmingly has put up flags around Belfast, which has the Union Jack, upon which is superimposed the crest of Belfast City with the slogan spelled out in full, F your Irish language. And the TUV, which is I think a much more extremist unionist party than the UUP, but not always possible to distinguish. But they were approached for the BBC. I'm reading this directly off the BBC website, says that the TUV recognises the considerable anger within the unionist community when it comes to the Irish language. But a party spokesperson added, that said, TUV does not believe that the Union flag should be defaced in this fashion. It is the flag of the nation and needs to be treated with respect. I think that level of being tone deaf doesn't come naturally. They are literally competing with each other to see how offensive they can be. And that is pretty shocking. And I think that really doesn't sit very well with the claim that the Ulster Unionist Party is non-sectarian.
Yes, but maybe we give him some credit for there's a political expediency. He doesn't want to be outflanked basically on the.
Yeah, I would imagine that they're afraid of losing voters to the DUP and the TUV, and that's why they're doing that.
One thing I wanted to ask you about, you seem convinced that Northern Ireland is heading inexorably towards unification to the Republic. I mean, is that fair, and why?
Yes, I wouldn't like to bet on the timetable, but I think it is. And to me, it's demographics. And it's actually going back a few years. Lord Ashcroft, who is this zillionaire who does polling on various things, to me, the standout result is not the level of unionist or nationalist support at any given time. What it is the demographic breakdown. Because the one that I'm looking at, which I think is from 2020, the only demographic that has a unionist majority is over 65s. And as you go down through the ages, you get a larger and larger nationalist majority. Obviously, that bottoms out at 18. They don't do opinion polls on under 18s, but in fact, there has been research done on the background of kids as young as 4 going into play school, essentially, which are 70% from a nationalist background. And that's fairly obvious. Why? Because not only are over 65s, where unionists dominate, dying, essentially, but people who are over 65 also don't have 4-year-old children. And also the younger age cohorts, Protestants overwhelmingly, especially people who are at the top end of the academic range, overwhelmingly go to university in Britain and very, very frequently don't come back. So that's a whole series of demographic pressures all pushing in the one direction, which is why you get this. And you see it in election results. It's not so long ago since Sinn Féin had only 1 MP in Northern Ireland. Now Sinn Féin has 7 MPs. There are more nationalists than unionist MPs. Everything that we know about demographics indicates that that process is going to continue, and that has a fairly obvious conclusion.
But it's correct to say that the fastest growing party in Northern Ireland is the Alliance Party. Is that correct?
That's a very dodgy demographic, because, you know, if I set up a party tomorrow and then 3 of my friends joined the next day, then I would have the fastest growing party probably anywhere in the world for a short time, even if there was only 4 of us. But
large numbers of people vote for Alliance, right?
Yes, and
my suggestion is that for various reasons, it might be a soft unionist vote.
It's definitely a soft unionist vote, and I think it's almost a gateway drug, because the other effect is that unionism is fraying, and I think that an awful lot of young people, say people under 30, are much more interested in single issue politics. And people interested in single issue politics, especially who are more activist or, you know, just more interested in that. If you look at the positions of Sinn Féin, the SDLP and the unionist parties, even if they are from a unionist background, those people will find support for those single issues amongst Sinn Féin and the SDLP, and to an extent also the Alliance Party, which is effectively moving people out. And I think, you know, a lot of that, where that unionist vote is going to the Alliance Party, or put it this way, the children of previously solid unionist voters are now Alliance voters.
I suppose that's one thing, which is that maybe there are a lot of people from a unionist background who are in Alliance. The other thing is that we're treating the demographics as destiny, but attitudes can soften, right? I mean, towards the national question. And so therefore that Alliance vote might also imply that people from a nationalist background might become more sceptical of the benefits of a united Ireland.
Possibly. I think that politics in Britain is largely incompatible with that, particularly seeing the rise of reform. And you saw, for example, what really restarted the Scottish independence movement after the defeat of the referendum in 2014, what really restarted that was Boris Johnson. So English national politics dominating in Britain, I think, is not good for unionists either in Scotland or in the north.
I suppose I want to ask one more short question about the perceived inevitability of unification, which is that it seems to me that there's a problem that the more attractive it is for someone living in the north to be unified with the Republic, the less attractive it might seem to people in the Republic. And it requires referenda in both constituencies. And so only one door would be open at a time, basically, is that, and it requires both doors to be open, essentially. Isn't that a problem that could cause a push towards Irish unification to fail, that it can't succeed?
I don't think so.
Constituencies? No.
I don't think so. I think it's very, very implausible that the vote would fail in the south. I think that's just very implausible. And even I think that opinion polling that puts it 60-40 or 70-30, I think that's dramatically understating it, because people will vote differently when the issue is in front of them.
And you're not afraid to be like, oh, it's become, Northern Ireland has become relative to the Republic so poor that this is, my taxes will go up so much that like I really don't want to do this. You don't think that is a concern, that kind of the...
I think anyone promoting a United Ireland would be wise to make sure that they have a very clear agenda so that we're not looking at that Brexit situation. It effectively turned into a dog chasing a bus. Then the dog caught the bus and then had no idea what to do next. So it's important not to get into that type of a situation. But I think that also, I think it's just economically incorrect, because I think that the synergies between the North and the South would actually be quite strong. And, Northern Ireland, although has much lower economic status at this stage, it does have very good education levels. So you can see that would feed into the economy in the South, I think, quite well.
And in the interview, you implied that the subvention from Britain to Northern Ireland is a myth. So why do you believe that?
I don't think that there is no money coming from Britain to the North of Ireland, but the idea that this is a deal breaker is incorrect, and in particular it's massively overstated. So if you look at how the supposed subvention is calculated, there are two sides to that equation. One is the tax intake and two is the spending. First of all, on the tax intake, there's an awful lot of dodgy accounting in order to get a subdued or a suppressed supposed tax intake for the North. So for example, if you have a mobile phone in the North and you pay your bill to Vodafone or O2 or whatever connection you have, the VAT on that phone bill is being booked by an English company based in London, and that is being attributed to English tax input. I don't think it's plausible that would continue in United Ireland. Clearly, sales in United Ireland would be vatable, and that VAT would be paid to the Irish government. I think with VAT and with other corporate taxes that are just artificially being falsely attributed to Britain, to London in particular. And on the expenditure side, the best example is all of Britain's state level spending is being proportionally attributed to Northern Ireland, and that's being counted as part of the subvention. So literally, when the RAF drops a bomb on a wedding party in Afghanistan, part of the cost of doing that is supposedly the subsidy that Britain is giving to Northern Ireland. The Trident nuclear missile base in Scotland, part of that cost is the subsidy to Northern Ireland, the aircraft carriers that Britain has, the diplomatic service and so forth. It's just not true that those things automatically become more expensive once Northern Ireland is moved into a United Ireland budget. And the other point is, and this is said of Scotland as well, that Scotland pays in less taxes than it's spending. Northern Ireland pays in less taxes. Wales pays in less taxes. But also England pays less taxes than it's spending. And that's because Britain, like pretty much every other government, is running a deficit. And when you hear one of these arguments, usually it's good to check out whether it's true, but it's also good to check out whether the unspoken assumption is true, because the assumption is that England is paying these. That's not correct. What's happening is that particularly capital spending is coming from government debt. So it's not the case that England will suddenly be awash with money because it doesn't have to pay for the Northern Ireland, or for that matter, Scotland or even Wales subvention.
Okay, well, thank you for that, William.
Thanks a lot. Talk to you soon, Kevin.
Here's How is Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast.
Go to the website for sources and references from the show. And while you're there, you can like the show on Facebook, follow the show on X, Twitter @Here's How Podcast, and get in touch if you want to suggest a guest or a topic for a future show. Thanks to all of the patrons on Patreon. It covers the cost of keeping the podcast going. And if you could throw in a couple of euro once or twice a month, please do go and sign up at patreon.com/Here's How. That link is on the website. Also there, you can find out how to subscribe to the podcast for free on your computer, on your phone, and by email. All that information is at www.here'show.ie. The Here's How podcast is produced and presented by me, William Campbell. The co-producer is Kevin Wolf. Thank you for listening. In a moment, we have a long interview. In a moment, we have an extended interview with the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, Jon Burrows. But first, I just want to say thanks to all of the patrons on Patreon. I really appreciate everyone who donates. We don't get a huge amount of money out of it. We're a small podcast. We're not in the same league as some other Irish podcasters, but In a moment, we'll have an extended interview with the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, Jon Burrows. But first, I want to say thanks to all of the patrons on Patreon. I really appreciate everyone who donates. We don't get a huge amount of money out of it. In a moment, we'll have an extended interview with Jon Burrows, the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party. But first, I just want to say thanks to all of our patrons on Patreon. I really appreciate everyone who donates. We're not a huge podcast, but those donations pay for things like web hosting and phone bills, and Kevin and myself basically donate our time for free. It's also a big morale booster when we get a new patron. It lets us know that there are people out there who listen and who appreciate the podcast. We make a big effort to cover things that are undercovered in Irish media. You're more than welcome to listen for free, but if you think that you could do the same as those other donors and throw in the price of a cup of coffee or even of a pint once or twice a month, there's details how to do that on the website and at the end of the show.